So it's July, and that must mean that it's the Open Golf Championships. And the Open Golf is somewhat different from other golf championships at other majors that you'll see throughout the year. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Please like and comment on the video below. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them in the future. So when you look at a typical parkland type course that you see at Augusta, beautifully manicured greens, and the rough is basically looks like the fairway that you'd find at any normal golf course, you know, wonderfully manicured, all sorts of beautiful surroundings, and links plays very differently. You tend to find you've got undulating ground, it's uneven, but also because it's near the coast you tend to get a lot of sea breezes that occur at a links course that you necessarily wouldn't get if you're inland. But also the way the course plays is significantly different as well. Typically people will go out towards the sea or maybe inland, and then they will reverse the direction as they play up to the 18th hole. So the way the front nine plays and the back nine plays is significantly different at a links course. But you've also got to contend with this very strange layout of the actual course itself. The structure of the course often feels very different. It's not so well manicured, the rough is thick, you tend to pick up breezes that are different at different times of the day, and it's a very different type of course altogether. But also, if we look back at the US Open, it was played at Erin Hills, and that was a very, very long course. That was 7,800 yards overall. If we look at Royal Birkdale, which is going to be played this year, it's going to be at least 800 yards shorter. So you'll actually find that it's almost like it's missing a hole. You'll actually find the course is playing significantly shorter, and that plays into certain players' strengths and against other types of players. But also you'll find that the fairways are less forgiving on a links course, and it's generally shorter, so it doesn't necessarily favour the big hitters, and that is an important characteristic to take into account when you're looking at links golf. So to understand how this is different and how it will affect who the winner is at this particular course, let's have a look at how you would typically play a golf hole. The first thing you're going to do is drive. You need to get your driver out and hit the ball as far as you can. Now the interesting thing about driving off the tee is that's when you'll get a lot of distance on your shot, and different players will have different capabilities to be able to strike very long tee shots and very accurate tee shots, but that's not necessarily an advantage on a links course where it's going to play a little bit shorter. Now if you look at the physiology of players, what you will tend to find is that younger players are able to hit the ball much further. So if you're looking at a course like Erin Hills, the younger players will be able to get a lot of distance on their tee shot, but if you're at a links course, that's not necessarily an advantage, so that does favour players that are a little bit older. Now the interesting thing about tee shots is that when you look at all of the age and the distance that people can get over tee shots, I did some research on this a few years ago, and I figured out that actually mainly it's a physical thing, the tee shot. And as a consequence, if you look at the age curve of players that are around 25 tend to hit the longest tee shots, and then over time that begins to deteriorate. So basically the older that you get, the less distance you will get on your tee shot, and therefore it becomes harder to hit it longer and more accurate. So you would tend to think that if you're playing a shorter course, that would tend to favour slightly older players, whereas a bigger, wider, open, longer course would tend to favour younger players. So when you look at links golf and you look at the Open this weekend, it's quite possible you could see an older player coming into the mix. So you do your tee shot and you hit the fairway, and then you've got a lovely approach to the green. Or maybe you don't hit the fairway and you actually end up in the rough. So the way to look at golf and the way that people play golf and the way that you would score it and price it would be based upon the number of shots you've got until you can actually sink the hole. That sounds obvious, but if you imagine if you send your tee shots to the left, you may have a different result, the number of shots that you need to get to the hole, than if you sent it to the right, or if you sent it right down the middle of the fairway where you're going to get a clean shot and a decent approach shot. Now the interesting thing to note about links golf is that you really do need to hit the fairway, because if you end up in the rough it can be a bit of a nightmare. However, this is where age comes into things again. As you get more experience at playing these big major championships at these very prestigious golf courses that are generally set up to be quite difficult, experience teaches you how to get out of those difficult shots. So again, while the younger players may be able to hit that ball really hard, fast and reasonably accurate, if you've got a narrower fairway on a links course and you end up in the rough, it's the experienced players that tend to be better at getting out of those situations. So the interesting thing about golf is there are lots of statistics available, just as there are in tennis, and they're freely available on all the PGA Tour sites, the European and the American Tour. And those will give you a clue as to how each individual player will play. If we look at the top ranked drivers at the moment by distance, you will find at the top of there Dustin Johnson. That's no surprise. You'll find some of the other major winners near the top of that leaderboard as well for driving distance. So that will necessarily give them advantage in that particular aspect of the game. But you also have things like putting stats, scrambling, approach shots, and from different distances as well. So if you combine all of those together, and we look, say for example, at a par 5, you'll know that Dustin Johnson is going to drive it maybe 20 yards further than somebody that's ranked 25th or so on. And that will allow you to work out roughly what chance they've got of being able to get that sort of distance, and how their approach shot goes, and how many putts it takes them to get that particular ball down. So there are loads of stats available, and you can actually combine all of them together to give you a rough idea of how you think each individual player is likely to play that course. So scrambling is where you get a par on the course itself without actually getting the green in regulation, or that's typically how it would occur. And that would mean that, for example, you've sent your ball into the bunker and you've got to get it out, and you haven't managed to land it on the green, but somehow you still make par. Very important part of the overall game. So one of the features of the Open Golf Championship on a links course is that the bunkers very often look like the Nevada nuclear test site. They're deep, they're wide, and they're very tricky to get the ball out. So putting is obviously a really important part of golf, and when you land on the green you're looking to get the ball down in at least 2 putts, and of course professional golfers will want to get it down in less than 2. But what chance do we have of getting it into the hole when we're on the green from different distances? So when you're within 2 feet of the hole, professional golfers have about a 99% chance of sinking this particular putt. So when you're over 2 feet but less than 4, your chances of putting drops a little bit to 87%. So when you're over 4 feet but less than 7 feet away, then the chance drops off quite dramatically. You're suddenly down to about 58% chance of sinking the ball from this distance. Now we reach the critical point. When you're between 7 to 12 feet away from the hole, all of a sudden the chance of a professional golfer getting this in the hole in 1 putt drops to about 1/3. So I have a question for you. My ball is here, the hole is over there, it's somewhere between 12 to 30 feet away. What chance does a professional golfer have of getting the ball in the hole when it's this sort of distance away? So if you're a professional golfer, if you're 12 to 30 feet from the hole, on average you'll have a 14% chance of sinking that putt on your first go. So I have another question for you. How far do you think you need to be from the hole for a professional golfer to have a better than a 50% chance of sinking that putt? So in order to have a 50% chance of sinking a putt in 1, a professional golfer needs to be 7 foot and 10 inches from the hole. So the Open Golf is played on a links course, very different from a traditional parkland course. A long and accurate drive won't make as much difference at a links course as it will at a traditional course, but also the links is laid out completely differently and it plays completely differently, and that very often favours the more experienced players necessarily than the younger superstars in golf. So yeah, take that on board during the Open Golf and hopefully you'll be able to pick a decent trade or a decent winner.